Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of I Am Christina DiArcangelo. And today with me, I have my guest, DiAnA McElroy. McElroy. Did I say your last name? Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things, you're welcome. One of the things I am horrible at is pronunciation. I mispronounce things all the time, and I never mean any disrespect. Sometimes I even give people other names because they look like that name instead of, and it's not me being pompous, it's just kind of what I do. So welcome, DiAnA, to the show. We're so glad to have you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. And I have to tell you right off the bat, I identify with so much of what you say. I'm an ESL student, so I'm like guessing, especially if it's a name I've never seen before, because I tend to read from memory. So yes, totally identify with that.
It's difficult. I've been like this my whole life, and as a kid growing up, I actually had some learning deficiencies. I couldn't comprehend what I read, and I was horrible at math, which is, both of those tools I use and skills every day of my life. I've now figured out, many years later, that I have a photographic memory. So when you said you read by memory, I understand that, because like I can work on a budget grid that's, I don't know, thousands of lines long. And I can remember like that row 56 has steady drug pricing in it. And that's where you're going to find it. And you're going to see the unitize in the duration of 36 months for that trial. Like that's how my mind thinks. It's so weird. It's so cool to meet somebody else that does the same thing, because not a lot of people talk about it because it's embarrassing. And it's like a superpower. Why can't we just talk about it now, folks?
I think learning how you learn is really valuable. I move schools every 2 years, and different education styles, different formats of how they imprinted education on you. And I learned things along the way. People make fun of me, but even to this day, when I go to an event, I bring my notebook with me and I take notes, because I've learned that the way something imprints is if I write it down. That's how I got through college. That's how I got my education, is, index cards. And yes, the process of writing
repetition.
Yes, exactly. Some people don't need that. You have a photographic memory. I don't. I need something to imprint on me. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it doesn't always work. So like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I have to, if I wanted to stay in, I'll repeat things to myself quietly, almost like Rain Man, which sounds goofy, but that's what I do. Like line 52, line 52. And so I learned the same way with I learned with flashcards and repetition. Like I remember learning my times tables, in third grade, but that's when they figured out there was an issue. I was going into fourth grade. And ironically, my son just started fourth grade this year. And so I can recall all these things because, my dad was like, listen, we need to help, fix this issue, because she needs to be able to comprehend what she's reading and she needs to know her math. So
yeah. No. And God bless that you had that advocacy. I think no one in my family spoke English till I was in high school. So I found my own coping skills. And again, moving every 2 years, the school system never kind of caught up with me. They never, always a new kid. So trying to figure out where she fits in. I laugh. I am extremely blind. Like if I take these off, everything's fuzzy. The world is, like I've had a couple of drinks. In sixth grade, they realized that she's not the squinty kid that she can't see.
Yeah. You just see glasses.
Yeah, exactly. But they just assumed that was my natural expression.
Yeah.
Like, look at her. She's always smiling. I'm focused, and I do smile a lot, but I'm focusing, and then I talk a lot. So they put me in the back. Which didn't serve me.
Nope. Same thing. I talked all the time, but they put me at the front because I talked all the time and they wanted to keep an eye on me. So I didn't get away with, being in the back. So at least I felt like I was learning more. But I was under the microscope all the time for talking. And my kid, it's funny to see how our kids mimic some of the things that we've done, because it's genetic. And he's always talking to people. And I'm always like, Chris, you got to stop talking. Like, Christian, stop talking. Don't talk. Well, Mom, you talk all the time. Well, that's a different story, Chris. It's work. I have to talk. I have to be on Zooms. I have to do these things. But there's a time and place to be quiet, and you've got to be quiet.
It's hard. It's hard, especially when you feel like you want to say something. There's a last story I'll share. There's a family joke that I got in trouble at PS 105 in the Bronx for talking. I didn't speak English yet. And my uncle he's like, who are you talking to? Like, no one understands Polish. Like, who are you talking to? I would just talk to the other kids,
Yeah.
And I always laugh because we had play dates and they didn't speak my language. I didn't speak their language, but figure out a way.
But the toys and the games, are universal.
Yeah, 100%.
So at least you could kind of play, you could figure out, which is pretty cool.
Hey, that's how I learned English, is eating an apple, and we'd go apple.
That's so awesome. Well, my son, when he was little and he was learning, English as his first language, and he understands Farsi and Italian, but my Italian's different because my dad was Sicilian and my mom is Northern. So our dialect is like a hybrid, in my household. But when my kid was little and my dad was trying to teach him colors, he had fruit snacks.
Yep.
And so he would hold up a fruit snack and say, Christian, what color is this?
Yep.
Green. This is green. And so it's funny that you said that about the apple, because it's the same thing. Like, again, it's repetition. You're just constantly, repeating yourself so you can learn.
100%. I mean, I've used that skill set in learning everything I could about cannabis and, the industry and the products and so 110%. Everything I've learned as a kid, I've just transferred to as an adult and have pushed forward with it.
Yeah, it's awesome to build our toolbox at that point and just continuously building and, not looking at this as an impediment, but, looking at this as a way to challenge yourself and achieve things that you never thought you would be able to achieve, and
110%. And showing our kids, like, this was one thing that I learned for me as a parent, showing my kids that, like, you don't have to be great at something coming out of the gate. Like, you don't have to I always tease my girls, like, don't peak in middle school. Don't even peak in high school. Like, you can, keep fostering and growing. I'm turning 50 in a couple of months, and I feel like my life is just getting started, like, in some ways, so yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I talk to my son about that all the time. Like, he had something happen this week at school. And I was like, well, did you try your best? And he goes, well, yeah, Mom, I tried my best. I said, okay, well, then as long as you try your best, and now we just have to figure out how to fine tune some of these skills that you seem to need some help with, you'll be fine. I mean, this is how everybody learns is, with making mistakes, correcting the mistakes, acknowledging it and going forward and not being embarrassed, because we don't know everything. I learn stuff all the time, like all the time. And like, especially in the cannabis space, because it's ever evolving and there's so much stuff going on. And, it's funny when somebody comes up with a post on LinkedIn about something and you're like, listen, I knew about that 2 years ago. I just didn't talk about it because there's a lot of things that I don't want to share because I'm doing stuff that is proprietary.
And maybe it's so funny because maybe that's the problem. I share everything. I find this industry to be very, very evolving so quickly. We're on the East Coast, so New Jersey, New York are constantly having new rules and regulations come out where we're literally building the laws as, in movement as the industry is opening up. And I find it fascinating. Never mind the health and wellness aspect of it, Yeah.
Yeah. It's, a lot of times, I wrote a white paper about the Pennsylvania program about 2 or 3 years ago with Dr. Brian Donner, and we used my Cannabot to obtain all the information. So it wasn't like we used Excel or something. It could be changed. It was, a tool that can be audited from a QA standpoint. And our paper went everywhere. They used it in Georgia to legalize their program, the Philippines. It was kind of interesting to watch it just hit everywhere, because the program in Pennsylvania, we have a tremendous amount of qualifying conditions. So we're very lucky so that patients can get into it. However, we, one of the things that I see as a patient, a medical patient, and we're a medical state, we're not recreational, but we have states that are boarding us that are recreational. So it's interesting to watch all that go on, around us.
I find it fascinating. So I worked for a multi-state operator, and we had holdings in Pennsylvania, Ilera Healthcare. Yeah. So they purchased, TerraSend purchased Ilera. And I ended up working at the cultivation site here in New Jersey, in my hometown.
Okay.
And so I was community outreach. So I did a lot with the Pennsylvania side as well. And in some ways, your system is better. Like, I like the fact that, especially for medical patients, you guys require pharmacists on staff. I find that critical. I wish New Jersey had adopted that. I realize it's more expenditure for the companies, but honestly, for patient care and for education and rolling out a new system, I found it like indispensable. Like, having a pharmacist to lean on, ask a question, learn from, getting that education as an employee and as someone who was forward facing in the company, I thought was outstanding. So there's I laugh at the terminology, like in Pennsylvania, marijuana is legal. In New Jersey, it's illegal. Cannabis is legal. So like those little nuances, I find it interesting that, because you guys are so medical, I'm curious to see what will happen when you go adult use. I hate the word recreational. As a mom, hate it. I hate it because I'm like, there's nothing. It makes it sound like it's for everyone. No, it's for adults.
And the thing too is that a lot of times people who are using it, if you want to say recreationally, not medicinally, 9 times out of 10 they're using it because they have anxiety, and it helps them calm down, which thereby means it's medicinal. So it's like we just keep running in circles. It's interesting that you have experience with Ilera, because I was working with Ilera early on when they first opened their doors. When they sold to TerraSend, I was working with all the chiefs, and I'm working with them now on the Xylera study, because they moved over and joined forces with Zelda. And I had worked with Zelda in my past life too. So, I started working with all these guys 6 years ago. So it's neat to see how it's progressed. And I like the fact that Pennsylvania instituted research automatically. And so, because that's where I come from. So it's like, I've been saying this for 6 years, I'm now 7 years. I don't understand why people don't understand why we have to do these things. We don't know what we don't know. So we have to prove it.
We don't know what we don't know, but yet we do know. So I always get asked, like, DiAnA, would it help with this? DiAnA, I'm not a doctor. I never claim to be one, but I always give someone lean on. I always recommend, like, well, I have a friend who's utilizing it for that. It's back in, like, coming from Poland, we used a lot of herbs, right? You didn't rent to a pharmacy. You went and you tried an herb, and you tried, your throat hurts. My first go-to is always lemon and honey. Like, try that first. Do you really have something going on with your throat, or did you just talk too much like your mother does? You'll know right away.
Or is it a gut issue?
Exactly.
Because your gut rules everything. I went to, it's interesting. Another thing that we're parallel with is it's really interesting, especially in Pennsylvania. Back when I was growing up, we went to a naturopath. She was an MD as well, but she was from Japan. And so it was so cool. So like, I remember this one thing she gave us when we had, not to be too graphic and like gross, but I remember when we get the stomach bug, and we would take something called paregoric. And I remember it was this terrible, it was in this brown bottle, and it was disgusting. And it was like, it burned a hole in your stomach, but it worked. And I remember all these things, like as a kid, and going and, there was your medicine outside the little pharmacy door in her, because she ran her practice in her, outside of her home, like attached to her home. It was so cool,
Well, it's funny. I was an exchange student in Japan for 5 weeks, and the way they look at medication as a holistic study, I mean, it's funny. I'll share with you. I went through 8 cycles of IVF, and towards the end, they said, try acupuncture. And it was funny. I will share with you my IVF doctor, who was not at his wit ends with me, but he really wanted me to succeed, said, DiAnA, two things I'm going to throw into the basket. He goes, I don't know why, but my cycles tend to be bigger and better after Thanksgiving. I want you and Bob to have a Thanksgiving dinner. So we did. He goes, I don't know if it's turkey. I don't know if it's the sense of community. He goes, I'm just throwing it as a doctor, this unscientific research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try it. So we did that, and then go to acupuncture, and I tried it as well, and I had a baby. So it's just funny, doctors see things, to your point about research, there's things we know innately, but because we don't have a paper written up about it and enough subject matter, we can't say it openly. But within the cannabis industry, we're constantly like, hey, try this strain because I've found that it helps me with this, because it is a dosing journey too. You're not not everything works for everyone else. So, we kind of lean in and get experience from what other people have utilized. Yeah.
Because everybody's endocannabinoid systems are different, and nobody really talks about that part. Yeah. And, it's different. Mine's different from yours. And,
yes,
unless you're getting your endocannabinoid test system tested, you really will never know what cannabinoids you're deficient in. So it's really hard. It's like a luck of the draw or whatever when you're in this space, because it's just like traditional pharma. Like so they came up with some pill to help with antibiotic or whatever, right? Well, not every patient's the same. It's the same thing. Every human is different. And so you're saying, because you studied this and X amount of people, that it works, but you're not always capturing all the side effect profiles. So the patients that had a higher side effect profile aren't being lassoed in, so the information's not being shared. It's one big vicious cycle.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like with anything, people aren't toting the negatives as much as they are the positives. So, but to me, like one of my foundations that I stand on is I try to dispel some of the negative behind this, and also normalize it. Like, listen, it took me, and it was a slow dial, because I was teaching on it, and then I became a patient. Because one day, true story, middle of the night, I woke up like, why am I telling other people to use this, and why am I not a patient in the program? And I went and looked online, and my primary doctor turned out to be a recommending doctor and never recommended cannabis to me as an alternative for the insomnia I'm experiencing because of perimenopause.
Yeah.
And I called him up and I'm like, Doc,
what's up with this?
I told you what industry I'm working in. Like, why wouldn't you recommend this to me? Because like most doctors, he's on the down low, down low, but he's on the state site, but he's not projecting it loudly and openly because he doesn't have that research.
Right.
Because he wants to,
Right. I mean, I'm a patient, obviously, in Pennsylvania. I have 2 autoimmune diseases, and I go to Penn. Yeah, and I go to Penn. So University of Penn is one of those universities that falls in our research chapter here. And so whenever I go to see my GP and I go to Penn, they'll look at my stats, and I get blood work every quarter, and sometimes more so than, if there's something going on, I might sometimes have to do it more. And it's always interesting when we look at the results from the time before and where we are and what I'm feeling. And they always want to say that, it's traditional, blah, blah, blah meds. And I'm like, no, you right there, you see that cannabis? Yeah, that's what I take. Okay. Yes. And I have all these other things I do. Cannabis isn't the magic bullet. You've got to do other things too, and live a healthy life is one of them. But that's what helped me. It wasn't all this other crap that you guys wanted me to take, because I get sick. Ever since I've had my son, I've developed so many allergic reactions. I mean, I had to get tetanus because I don't know what to do about tetanus. God forbid I stepped on a can, right? Because I can figure out a lot of things, but this I didn't research. So I said, okay, how bad could this be? Fine, it's a shot. Go ahead and shoot me this, one time. I should be okay. I don't remember as a kid or younger worrying about this tetanus issue. So they hit me one time, and I swear to you, it happened right before I was going to Charleston and Savannah with my son. It was on a Wednesday. We flew on a Saturday. My whole arm was swollen and red. I had a bullseye. It looked like I had Lyme, or people were asking me if I had monkeypox because it looks like an open sore. It's not, I don't have monkeypox. This was called, I got a tetanus shot and I had an extreme reaction.
Wow.
So I went back to the doctors again because I had to go back to finish my first visit, because I was, they make you do these physicals now as part of your insurance to keep you insured. And so we couldn't get through my physical because I had COVID and I have long hauler syndrome. And so we were going through all this. And so he's pissed off at me because I was like, listen, man, you knew that I had all these issues. I said this when I called and made my appointment. And so when I go back again to finish, I let him know all of my issues. I literally thought I was having a heart attack. I had pain going across my pec muscles. I had swelling, all these things, right? I looked up all the side effects. I had every one but two. And so I was like, I'd like you to update my records because it was serious. This was not an adverse.
No.
And he writes, oh, adverse event. I said, that's wrong. That's the wrong terminology. It's serious adverse event. Even though I was not hospitalized, I could have been if it continued down. I said, if I didn't take cannabinoids and put some salve on this, you could still feel the lump. A week later, I can still feel it, DiAnA.
Wow.
I can still feel the lump on the inside. It hurts still. It's been weeks.
And, the problem with allergic reaction, what I understand is it can build upon itself. So if you exhibit, some kind of a rash the first time, the second time can be a little worse. The third one, it is. And so your doctor should be very mindful that she had any sort of reaction. We're not going to, unless that's the therapy they're going with right now. They're introducing the reactions, but in a very small level.
Yeah.
Because,
wow. This is not herd immunity with us here. Yeah. This is tetanus. I mean, this is nonsense. I mean, I don't understand what happens. And so now, we have it updated on my chart. And so now I know, okay, for my son, when he goes and he gets a tetanus shot now, we know that there's potential he can have a problem because I had a problem. So at least we know we could be educated a little bit more about it, unfortunately, and it sucks.
It's funny, Christina, I'm adopted. And so a lot of these questionnaires ask you, what's family history? What's family history? What's family history? And I'm always like, I'm a clean book. So be cognizant of everything. So, I had a really good primary doctor and he prescribed a mammogram before my time. Why? Because TMI, I out myself a lot. I happen to have cystic breasts.
Okay.
So what are you feeling? So let's get a baseline when you're 25. So we have, and then go from there, which I thought was brilliant.
Makes sense to me.
Exactly. I don't know my family history. I don't know my family history. And at the time they weren't doing the markers test, So, so it's just like the preventative is really the way that we're going to keep people healthy. And I find, cannabis is part of my preventative.
Right.
It really is. It allows me to, I tend to microdose. It allows me to have more energy, which then allows me to exercise more. I'm a yoga instructor.
Yeah. So awesome.
Relaxes. It takes the inflammation out.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you can function as a normal human. How imagine that.
Yes, I know. And it's funny. I've outed myself, and now it's to the point where my neighbors know, my the surrounding towns know that I am the cannabis lady, the one that's going to talk about it, the ones that's going to promote it. And I do it openly, but I will tell you something really quickly shifted right after we went adult use in New Jersey. We had a event here in my neighborhood. And I purposely stayed out of it, but a lot of people were consuming cannabis. And I kept running around going, do you smell my people? My people are here. Do you smell my people? My people are here. Because it was so stigmatized that no one had done it openly prior.
Right.
And now, except for me, and I'd be like, yeah, if you smell it, it's probably me, because no one else is owning up to it. No
Right.
one else
Of course not.
I like flower. I like traditional flower,
Mhm.
but it's, that kind of like pushing the dial that is something part of my advocacy in this space.
That's awesome. Well,
Thank
thank you so much for joining us today, DiAnA.
It's been a pleasure.
It was such a nice time talking to you today and just
Same.
talking about all the different things that, we have in common, which, we always try to do on these shows is to show, that we are the same. So with that, remember, we are the same. I am Christina DiArcangelo. Thank you for joining us today.